Zottola. I am a program associate here at the Justice Programs Office at American University. As Anna said, we've got a great webinar lined up for you today. We've noticed throughout our work in the Veterans Treatment Court field that this is a topic that a lot of people struggle with, a lot of programs struggle with, so we hope that this webinar will help people sort of navigate this relationship. I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves as they come up, but I am going to hand it over now to Justice Stratton from Ohio, and yeah, that's all I got. So Justice Stratton.
Thank you, and I hope everyone can hear me fine. I am very, very excited to be part of this effort, and wanted to just kind of give you some background to put in context my perspective and where I come from. I have a little unusual background. I was born a missionary kid in Thailand. My parents went out there in 1950. I went to a mission-run boarding school that was actually in South Vietnam until the Vietnam War became too severe. The only Americans I knew as a missionary kid were the other missionaries and the GIs. And so my whole world growing up was involved around war and GIs and military, so I had a lot of exposure to that. Came to America when I was 18 and put myself to college and law school because my parents were still in Thailand. But I have a long history of veterans. My 5 uncles and my dad were in World War II. My grandfather was killed in World War II. My 2 brothers were in the Vietnam theater, and I have a cousin still in the Air Force. And so I have a lot of links to veterans, but even though I wasn't one myself. I became a judge 27 years ago, was a trial judge for about 7 years. And that's the first time I really experienced issues of mental illness, which I never saw growing up as a missionary kid in a small village. And became very interested in mental health courts and trying to figure out a different way to deal with the population. And as a result of that, I became involved in speaking a lot nationally, involved nationally on starting mental health courts, and met a gentleman from the VA at one of these conversations in about 2008, whose name was John Kuhn, and he and I had breakfast together, and he said that the VA was starting veterans courts, and I said, well, what's that? And when he described it, because I knew there was a benefits appeals court, and I said, well, that's a mental health or a drug court, but you have a vet in it. Why don't you join our mental health vet court, drug court movement, our movement, and build on what we've already tried to do? So we put together a big conference for the Veterans Administration to explain how the treatment court model works, and had Judge Russell and a couple people who were leaders in starting veterans treatment courts, who actually were, most of them were mental health court judges to begin with. And then as a result of that, I was invited to be part of a committee that the VA put together to design the Veterans Justice Outreach Specialist project. And one of the things we said to them, because there were about 3 judges who had started veterans court on their own, just a veterans track, really not a separate court per se. And we said, will you please make this court available even if somebody is not in a treatment court, veterans treatment court, because a lot of jurisdictions will never have them, don't believe in them, don't have the resources, philosophy, many, many reasons. But we want to have every veteran be able to access this service. So they agreed to that. So if there's anything of importance I can tell you is you do not have to have a veterans treatment court to access your VJO. That's a common misperception even here in Ohio, as long as I've worked on things. So I wanted to make sure that you understood that very, very important point. So what were we trying to do? Basically, the VA had a very good program with specialists who would go into the prisons, find veterans who are already convicted, help connect them with services upon leaving, on reentry. But they really had nothing for veterans coming into the system. So this is basically folks coming into the system, the VJO. And they have a unique set of issues, which I'll go into in a little bit later, and they really have a lot of opportunities for services, but many of them never accessed them. And so the goal was to try to provide a fast track to those services for justice-involved veterans, because that is really a very important place in their life where they really, really need to have those services. And make sure I saw, yeah, you said 3, okay, 4. So what is a justice-involved veteran? pretty much somebody who's been arrested, he's in jail pending a trial or a conviction, or he's now out on bond, or he's been sentenced but not to prison but to like probation. And so that's the target audience. Coming into the system is really what we're looking at and what is really important. So when we started this program, we started with 159 centers, medical centers, each got a VJO, and that was the place where we started. So I participated in some national trainings. I wrote a little course called Courts 101 to try to explain to these mostly social workers who were hired to do this position how courts work, how you interface with courts, where's the connection. And one of the things I learned in doing so is that there are an unbelievable amount of services available through the VA. I did not really know that. I did not really appreciate that or understand that. And it was really amazing to me how many services were available. So it became more important to me than ever that people learn about VJOs because they can access these services. We have, as you can see from the slide, a lot of veterans, of whom a good number are incarcerated, and we need to be able to connect them with those services. The different wars called them different things, and I'll just go through that quickly, but currently we know of a lot of it is called PTSD, or PTS as some would like to call it, or traumatic brain injury is also a very, very big factor. But the vets have a lot of resources to deal with a lot of this. And you can see from this slide where sort of they came from in what wars, because a lot of the vets that come into the system really also are from Vietnam era. I just was at a veterans graduation recently where the gentleman was from the Vietnam War, and he had been drug and alcohol ever since he got out of the service, and it was his first time since he had left the Vietnam War that he had been clean and sober. Who are the types of people that are in these jails? You can see from the statistics, and I don't think any of us are the types that are going to go read all these statistics. You can read them while we talk. But there are a lot from the Vietnam era. A good number of them, half of them, are what we consider probably the Afghan-Iraq War era. Several of them are disabled or retired, and a lot of times that can lead to their alcohol or their drug dependency because of being on opiates or pain medication. Very large percentage are homeless. That has been a huge push of this administration to end homelessness, and that's been a very, very important factor to try to get rid of the homelessness issues. And so you can see that housing is a very, very important piece and a very important resource. There are housing credits that are available for veterans even if they have a criminal justice background, which don't often exist in situations where someone has a criminal record and they can't get Section 8 housing. So this becomes very, very important to get the housing, because if you don't have a house, you're right back in the beginning, and you can see the statistics there on the housing needs. Also, there's a pretty high rate of physical health needs, not just mental health needs, but physical health needs. And so one of the important things I like to stress in using the VJOs is you don't just get help for the drug addiction or alcohol or mental health disorders. You can get physical care because you connect them with these services, and sometimes getting their physical condition dealt with, their medical physical condition, leads to much better mental health for them and much better improvement. So that's such a valuable resource. And the important thing too to stress is that so many of these resources exist in your community, but every time you don't use a VJO, you don't identify someone as a veteran, you're using local resources, which are very scarce and often cut. We've had huge cuts in Ohio. And so the ability to use these resources, it takes away from the use of local resources. It actually saves more for your local resources. You have to be eligible, and Mary Gillette will probably go through a little bit more of this, but you have to be eligible. You can upgrade. It's a rather difficult process. A lot of Vietnam War era veterans were discharged for conditions now that would be called PTSD and not be a dishonorable discharge. But as you can see, many have these significant factors of the previous pages, but never accessed the VA services for a multitude of reasons. And so now we are trying to give them the opportunity to do that. So what happened is when we started, there were like maybe when I started in 2008, I'd heard of maybe 4 or 5 veterans treatment courts that had been started mostly by judges, as I said, who had started mental health courts. We now have over 460, and they are growing regularly, so it may be even more by now. When we started, we had obviously no veterans served by VJOs. In the Veterans Treatment Court system alone, we had 1,900 served as of 2012, and up to almost double that, 3,900 in 2015. But that number keeps growing as our outreach grows. And we started with, I had 159, they said now 167, but we're now up to 261 VJOs, so they've almost doubled the capacity. We know in Ohio we used to have 5, I think we have 10 to 12 now. So they're adding VJOs as the capacity goes up. And you can see from this slide, the capacity is growing up dramatically. You saw the number, about 4,000 served to veterans treatment courts, but there's a lot that goes through the jail system. As I mentioned before, you could access them without having a veterans treatment court. There's a lot of them that go through the jail system that are served by VJOs. That 46,500 means that you have 46,500 veterans who had probably, most of them, I would venture to say, had never been connected with services or before, and now are connected and receiving help and receiving services at a time that they really need it the most. So it's just, to me, it's just an absolutely wonderful program. I am so high on this program and so excited. I don't have a slide for this, but I just want to talk from personal experience about some of the value of the VJOs as I've seen it grow over the years. As I said before, there are so many resources available that often are very scarce. The housing with the criminal justice background, the health care, the drug and alcohol treatment, employment. There's a lot of employment services that are available. They don't use your scarce local resources. More often than not, you can get some local help and get them all these services in your area. If not, there are provisions to do so otherwise. And VJOs in particular are like almost an extra probation officer for a judge, in that they can be part of your treatment team, and both the two next speakers will explain how that really works. But they understand how to get this access to these services, and they understand the unique needs of a veteran. Plus, they also have been very effective in setting up veterans treatment courts. That was not an intended function when we started this program, and I don't remember ever talking about having them help start veterans treatment courts, but it's a natural because they understand how they work, they understand how effective they are, and so therefore they can help a county set one up if you don't have one yet. That takes a little more time, as I'll go to in a little bit, but those are some of the values I've seen that we have. We do have some challenges, and here's a graph that shows how many veterans have been served and how the growth has been so dramatic. There's a report that the GAO put out fairly recently that really is saying there should be more performance measures and risk assessments. I won't go into those because that's a long report, but some interesting things came out of there as some of the challenges that we face. One of them is VJOs that work in rural areas versus urban. You can be in an urban area and go to one court and see 20, 40, 50 veterans in one setting, or you can be a rural area and you can drive 2 hours to get to one court to see 2 vets. So there's really challenges. So it's really hard to compare, well, this VJO serves this number, but this VJO only serves this number. You have to really look at that. Large population areas versus small population areas, bigger concentrations of vets in the large population areas. Another interesting factor is that just going into the jail is often a shorter contact, shorter service involvement. But if the VJO gets involved in a veterans treatment court, those court commitments are anywhere from 1 to 3 years, depending on your program. And that means the VJO can be involved with that particular veteran for a pretty lengthy period of time. And that takes much more time versus some briefer jail visits. And now, as I said, it's kind of the extra duty that they've developed of working on setting up the veterans treatment courts as well. Some of the VA hospitals have different priorities as to how they use them. There's not a real clear program as to exactly what you're supposed to do. They've recommended, this report recommended that they be a handbook. I understand that there is a handbook for policies and procedures that might customize it a little more. That's in progress. It's still not there. And I'm hoping Mary will talk about the Veterans Reentry Search Service, which is something that I'm recently learning about and going to certainly promote much more here in Ohio. But so many times we have our judges say, well, I don't have enough veterans. Ohio has 900,000 veterans. We're 6th largest in the country. And I constantly run into judges who say, well, we don't have very many veterans. Well, if you ran them through this match service, which Mary can explain better than I, you will find that there is a dramatic increase in the number of veterans because so many will not identify as a veteran. And so many people, so many courts don't ask. When I started this program and came back to Ohio with it, it was like, you know, nobody asked if they had military background. And you don't ask if they're a veteran, you have to ask if they have military background. So it really became very interesting to try to challenge our judges to say, you know, if you ran them through this search service, you might have 20, 30 more than you know in there. And so that's really one of the challenges. We also know that veterans have a much higher risk of homelessness. So that's a challenge to really kind of find homes in a very scarce environment. Residential treatment facilities are often not available. They're long-term, short-term, and that's a problem. And housing for sex offenders. The VASH voucher, the voucher that exists for homelessness for veterans is not available to sex offenders, and that becomes a huge issue that we are still trying to figure out and figure out how to deal with. So those are some of the things that, from my perspective, are issues and challenges, but I am such a strong proponent. I was so excited about this program. I just think it has been one of the real sea changers in Ohio and nationally as I go around and speak. And I'm very grateful that the Veterans Administration started this program. And so I'm a big promoter and continue. I'm amazed how few judges, even in Ohio where I've worked so long, still don't know about it, and I still keep having to push it. So I'm trying to get the word out as much as I can. The next person you're going to hear from, I'll have her introduce herself, but I wanted to let you know that I've worked with her since 2009. She was one of our first VJOs. She and I have done many presentations together. She knows this stuff really well. She's my go-to person. She's just fabulous, and it's just a real pleasure to work with Mary. So Mary, take it away.
There we go. Everybody hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you, Mary.
Okay. I wanted to first let you know that a little bit about my background. Justice Stratton had stated that she met me through the Veterans Administration about 2009, and we were at one of the first conferences to kind of show other VA specialists how to start up a veterans treatment court, how to serve the veteran, and some of the challenges that we faced. Our vision was that every justice-involved veteran would have access to quality health care so that they could realize their full, meaningful potential as being self-reliant and being able to contribute positively to the community. Our primary objective, of course, was to prevent homelessness by connecting the justice-involved veteran with appropriate treatment services through the VA and other resources that encourage their adherence to treatment. Having trouble here with the slides. Here we go. Okay, some of the risk factors that you're likely to see with somebody who's justice involved is they may be homeless, as Justice Stratton had mentioned. There's mental illness, substance abuse, or co-occurring disorders of mental health and substance abuse, chronic health issues, They may have experienced some trauma, and this can be either childhood trauma that they carry over into the military, as well as assault, sexual trauma, and being exposed to combat, as well as you may see some traumatic brain injuries. Again, this can be as a result of being homeless on the land. A lot of times they're going to get assaulted, as well as head injuries related to combat. You're also going to see that they have multiple life stressors, financial stressors, having supports of family, maybe having someone die, a loved one, going through divorce, economic poverty, or having the lack of friends or supports. Our job is to kind of help with homeless prevention, and the VA does have a number of grants now that are available to community providers in assisting this, and I'll go into a little bit more of this in a little bit. One of the programs that you heard about is Supportive Services for Veterans and Families, and this will assist veterans in gaining access to housing rapidly from maybe shelter or even being on the land, where they can have deposits paid for, first month's rent, getting utilities caught up, whatever the veteran may need in order to get them supported again. Also, having access to medical care. We talked a little bit about the mental health needs, post-traumatic stress disorder, as well as addiction. You're also going to see a number of folks that may have some cognitive issues, maybe dementia, that's related to their alcohol abuse, or even dementia as a normal progression of their aging. Diabetes, TB, you know, I can go on and on about all the different types of medical things that you may see. There's also, like we had previously mentioned, the interpersonal supports, the lack of housing. The scope of my job entails a lot of things. A lot of this is engaging with the legal system through the jails. We will provide assistance with the jails in identifying veterans. We talked a little bit about the VRSS system, but in a lot of times the Sheriff's Department, as well as their police reports, there's a program called here in Ohio, OLEG, where there's a question there that asks them if they are military, and that's not always getting asked when they're going through their interview, and then doesn't get passed on to the probation department or the courts while they're processing them. So it may be identified at one place and the information is just not getting shared on. So we do a lot of jail outreach, and this requires a lot of diplomacy, of being able to have knowledge of the jail culture and the impact on veterans and their perception and their behaviors, as well as assisting the veteran with those and those working with them in helping them to adapt pro-social behaviors so that they can adapt to the community. As we also note, the courts, when we go into the jails, that may be our first encounter with them. It used to be that I would get a notice from some of the jail staff say, hey, you know, we have a veteran here today who's identified himself, and then we go in there and we find out that they don't meet full eligibility for health care. One of the things that we want to stress early on is that every veteran is eligible for VA services. We don't not give veterans access to care. It may not be VA services, but we will connect them with community resources that can help them with their housing and other specific needs that they may have so that they can obtain that stability. A lot of that is developing partnerships within your community, developing coalitions. I have a number of communities that I'm working with that may not have veteran courts established, but we develop these community partners with the mental health agencies, jail staff, probation, parole, We'll have Red Cross, we'll have some of the housing providers and shelters there, as well as that are providing supportive services for veterans and families. We also have agencies through child support and jobs and family services that are all there together looking at what veterans we're approaching or we're meeting with in the community and what needs they may have. And by establishing these coalitions, you're able to provide a better care continuum for that veteran, whether they are eligible for VA services or not. One of the downsides is that Justice Stratton mentioned is that our catchment areas may be somewhat large, and we may only have a limited number of VJOs providing support for that veteran. But they also, in addition to that, have maybe some ancillary needs, such as having outstanding child support, maybe having other legal issues, being maybe not homeless, but maybe facing an eviction, may have been preyed upon by people in the community that have taken advantage of them and taken their money so that they're having some financial instability. So a lot of that is where we will link them to other legal services that the VJO may not deal with, because mainly we're dealing with criminal issues. So that we're going to connect them with legal aid providers. Here in Ohio, we have the Ohio Legal Aid Society, and they also help us in setting up legal clinics within our VA facilities so that veterans can come in on a weekly or biweekly basis, or sometimes even monthly, with an issue that's not being addressed in the criminal courts. They may be able to get answers or quick advice for. We do a heck of a lot of documentation and record keeping, collecting data on who the population we're serving, what types of services we're providing them. Some of this information we've gotten through the years are our challenge surveys that we provide in the community. These are given to providers as well as veterans in the community that can help them to identify where there's some gaps in services. So with that, we've been able to identify that there's needs for housing in this area. When I first started with the VA in 2006, here in Columbus, Ohio is a pretty big community, and you would think it has a lot, but we're not a VA hospital. We don't have the domiciliaries, so we had to work in partnership with a lot of the shelters and other community providers, housing providers, to provide the housing needs that our veterans had. That was identified in one of our challenge reports as that being an unmet need. With that came about our HUD-VASH, which is Housing through Housing and Urban Development, VA Supportive Housing. And I want to make a correction here. Justice Stratton had mentioned that sex offenders are not eligible under HUD-VASH for housing, and that's not completely true, or not completely accurate, I should say. Tier 2 or Tier 1 veterans that have a sex offense are eligible. Those that are not a lifetime reporting may be eligible for housing under our HUD-VASH, and that provides supportive services, gets them linked to all the medical, mental health, and case management services that will help to keep them stable in the community. The only ones that will be eliminated from that program are the Tier 3 or lifetime reporting sex offenders. And that's probably the most difficult population, and that's an area that we're really trying to look at how we can establish housing providers, again, developing partnerships with our community housing agents to provide that specialized housing for those individuals. And then as well as linking with them when they're coming out of prison. As Judge Justice Stratton mentioned, we have a program that's called Health Care for Reentry, and that's on the prison side. And those prison VA liaisons will contact me or another VJO, letting us know ahead of time that a veteran is coming out into the community and is going to need X, Y, and Z in order to maintain stability. We will communicate with them and their case management staff, get them scheduled for VA appointments, set up so that they can move into a shelter or be able to identify some resources for them upon their exit. So as you can see, there's a lot of planning and development and coordination of services. This is a graph here of showing all the different services that a veteran may need or experiences as being justice involved. Again, we talked about the homeless program coverage with the SSVF and the HUD-VASH. We provide a lot of mental health assessments within the community to kind of, one of our homes reports actually does kind of triages to see what needs a veteran may have upon our first meeting. So we're doing an assessment during that time with them either in the jail or out in the community to see what they may need in order to be stable. And in the process of that, we're also looking at what the programs they might be eligible, whether it be mental health intensive case management or having home-based primary care as being something that to where a veteran can't leave his home, and when he does leave his home, he ends up getting into trouble or lost or what have you. We can identify these specialized programs to help our veterans maintain some stability. Part of the process here in Columbus, Ohio, or in the state of Ohio, is that the Supreme Court set up an accreditation process for treatment courts to identify themselves and have a standard guidelines of what you need to do or have a part of your program in order to call yourself a Veterans Treatment Court or a specialized docket. And then they have individuals from the court that will come out, aid you in setting up a specialized docket, as well as assist you in getting the needed paperwork or documents ready for that specialization. Hybrid courts, there's a number of different types of hybrid courts, such as mental health courts, drug courts, federal courts. We also have reentry courts. The reentry courts are those that are coming from the prison. They're reintegrating back to the community and are going to need some assistance. So there are specialized courts that help them to continue their probation, and because a number of our folks are going to reoffend within the first 2 to 3 years after their release, if not given the supportive services. Some of the things that we can't do as a VJO are be a special coordinator for that court. We can't provide the specialized case management that they need ongoing. We do if they're in a treatment court, but we can't if they're out in the community. We have other specialists that may be able to provide that service to them. We can't be forensic evaluators. We have programs here within the community that do that job very well. But we, and one of the things is the reason is that the VA prohibits us from actually coming in and saying this mental health disorder or this medical condition that they have is a cause for them committing this crime, and actually treating it like we're providing a defense for them. And that's not what our role is. They have attorneys that are there that are very knowledgeable about doing that, and they provide those forensic specialists to come in and provide that education to the court so that they can make appropriate sentencing. We can not be coordinators or promise that somebody's going to get into admission to a special program. We can do the intakes. We can provide the documentation that goes along with that so that teams can do an assessment of, is this person really going to meet the needs of what this program provides? And also look at the motivation of that veteran to see whether they're motivated to even do the treatment, because the bottom line is if they're not invested in it, they're probably not going to be successful. We're not enrollment specialists or benefits specialists. We do have some knowledge of it, and we do try to look at what things are going to make a veteran eligible for services. In fact, one of the things that we really want to do is to educate the community on not making that judgment about who is eligible and what services they're eligible for, but to actually seek out the VA is answering those questions for them and always direct them to us. And of course, we're not hospital directors, and we can't influence policy. A lot of what we do is work both internally and externally within the community by developing those partnerships. I talked a little bit about that. One of the other partnerships that we have are crisis intervention teams. We will provide our specialty to talk about what are the veteran needs and what are, educate them on the culture and what things that veteran may need in order to stabilize, as well as how to approach them. We have the Veterans Reentry Search Service, which Justice Stratton touched on a little bit. That's a new initiative that we've had in the last couple of years. The prisons have been using it pretty readily, and what it does is exactly, it matches the databases that are being used in the courts as well as the jails and the prisons, and sends that data up to national, where it spits out the information back to the provider, the courts, the jails, the sheriff's office, and says, oh, you've got a veteran here. So one, they're being identified and linked appropriately, as well as they also link with us so that we can go in there and discuss what types of needs they may have. We also do a lot of telejustice and telehealth. The telejustice has been used a lot, and telehealth has been used a lot in our prison for reentry. Here in Ohio, we only have 2 veteran reentry specialists that are liaisons to the VA, and they cover the whole state of Ohio. And they're meeting with veterans within 60 to 90 days of their exit from prison and getting linked with them. Well, you know, it covers a lot of area. So one of the advantages that they found is by setting up these telehealth sites within the jail, within the courts, within the prisons, to actually do that so we don't have to physically be there, but we can observe the veteran, and we can make appropriate assessments as well as coordinate any discharge planning that they may need. A lot of what we do is educating the community and the families on what their veteran is experiencing and how we approach them and how we can support them. I've already talked a little bit about the supportive services for veterans and families. This is a program that is contracted or granted to community providers such as Salvation Army, Volunteers of America, and they provide both assistance for veterans who are at risk and those that are already homeless. And so it's prevention as well as stabilizing them in permanent housing. And that can provide, you know, monies for deposits, can provide first month's rent, help them with utilities, help them with transportation, getting documents needed for housing, whatever the veteran may need. And short term usually provides anywhere from 4 to 6 months, depending on what the veteran's needs are. And they can be qualified for that within every 3 years. not going to go over a lot of the stuff I've already talked about as far as points of contact and utilization of other structures. We try through our homeless outreach. They're on our website through VA Homeless website, which is www.va.gov/VJO. It can tell you who your contacts are within your community, and it goes state by state. We also have listings for points of contacts for our stand downs, which are big events that we have that try to address a number of needs for veterans in the community to meet all their psychosocial needs, as well as employment, housing, financial benefits, medical, even getting haircuts. We had a big, huge stand-down event here just last month. And we also provide legal services there. We had our legal aid that came in there, helped to set aside warrants so veterans could enter housing, and also if there were warrants so that they could set it aside so they could attend without having to go back into jail, which is sometimes a real big worry for our veterans. If they have some anxiety about being in jail and they have a mental health disorder such as PTSD or schizophrenia, you know, having that much stimulus and being fearful and being put into a jail situation can be very, very traumatic and re-traumatizing them. So we may be able to work with their probation departments or attorneys to assist us in getting those set aside so that we can address the situations. We do a lot of public promotion, this being one of those things that we provide a lot of webinars, do public speaking, provide education to crisis intervention teams in order to educate them about veterans treatment courts as well as the services that VA provide. We work in collaborations with the courts. We don't tell them, well, this is what you need to do and here's the type of people that you should be admitting. We try to educate them, of course, and assist them in identifying people that are appropriate. The high risk, high needs are going to be those that are going to benefit most from your veterans treatment courts. So we'll do a risk assessment to see who's going to meet that criteria best and be best suited for that program. We do a lot of times meet with community partners where veterans or judges are saying, you know, I don't have enough veterans. I try to link them with other courts that are already well established. And I will give them a big court, which maybe has 60 participants in the court, as well as the small rural counties that maybe have anywhere from 6 to 10 veterans in that court, so that they can see that you don't have to necessarily have a large court in order to have a veterans docket. And then there are all different types of court. As I said, you can have a mental health drug court docket, you can have a municipal docket with handling misdemeanors or a common pleas handling felonies. We're willing to assist in any way that we can. So the courts are going to set up that program criteria and the admission criteria. And then, you know, we already talked about, you know, depending on what state you're in and if there's a certification process or not. If there's not going to be as much unified courts. They're going to vary from place to place. And when I first started out here in Ohio, I started out working in a mental health court docket because the judge didn't believe that they had enough veterans. Through participating in that, that was my in to one, educating them on the types of services that we could provide and providing some expertise on how to address and work with those veterans effectively. As I said, we work as a team member. We provide that education about the veterans culture, and then we also help to facilitate access to services and benefits. A number of our veterans may qualify for what we call compensation and pension benefits. This can be for a service-related injury or illness, that's something that happened to them while they were in service, that they will receive some monetary compensation, and it's rated anywhere from 0 to 100%. And this is tax-free dollars. They can work on top of that depending on, you know, it really is assessing how much of an impact that service-related illness or injury is still impacting them today, and how they may or may not be able to function in employment. We have services such as vocational services, vocational rehabilitation for anybody who maybe have a service connection of 20% or more. They may be able to receive, in addition, or, you know, separate from their GI benefits, they may be able to receive some additional specialized training in a certain field to reintegrate them back to the community and have them some meaningful employment. Then we also have what we call a non-service connected pension, and that's basically a lot like your Social Security benefits or Social Security supplemental Social Security, which are to provide benefits to a veteran so that they're able to meet their basic needs. And the disabilities could be long-term substance abuse or alcohol abuse, chronic mental health issues, even incarceration, you know, long periods of incarceration where they have difficulty getting employment again. This may be a benefit if they are wartime. They have to be wartime veterans in order to be eligible for that. We talked a little bit about the advantages of the Veterans Treatment Court when Justice Stratton was talking, and that is by helping to reduce the medical costs and medication costs. We can't provide medications and treatment while they are incarcerated, can provide, because that's basically the institution while they're incarcerated is responsible for providing any medical care or needs that they might have during their incarceration. But following that, we want to get them linked to services. In some cases, when we're looking at the courts, we're going to have veterans that maybe have opioid or alcohol abuse and maybe need what we call medicated assisted treatment. The VA can provide that, and some of that is very, very costly. I know here in the state of Ohio, we've had an epidemic with opioids and the use of Vivitrol and naltrexone. Those are some really expensive drugs, but with the assistance of the VA, that can provide some monies or some relief to the courts that are having to flip that bill, or the community that's having to pay for that. We also can provide free mental health care and substance abuse counseling to those veterans. Again, if they're not eligible for VA health care benefits, we're going to try to link them to services within the community. And as I said, we work with a lot of community providers in order to facilitate that. And again, by being able to meet with them, either in the jail or in the prison, in the community, wherever they may be, we may be able to lift the burden of shelter beds by being able to get people access or applications to housing as soon as they are able to leave the facility or in the process of that, and then linking them to the VRSS or HUD-VASH resources that they can access. Again, this is the referral process here. Also, the website that I told you about that you can click on to, and this will let you know who are the Veterans Justice Outreach Specialists in your area. Again, they're going to vary their duties and their catchment area. For here in Ohio, some of our catchment areas overlap. If the veteran is receiving services here in Columbus, but they follow into Cleveland, of course I'm going to be able to treat them here in Columbus because that's the parent institution that they're most comfortable with. So, but this at least gives you a guideline of who you can contact and get some more information about what's available to your veterans. And with that, I'm going to turn the webinar over to Judge Zottola.
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me? I'm assuming you can. My name is John, and my last name is Zottola. I'm a judge of the Court of Common Pleas in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. That's the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area. I've been a judge since 1994, and since 2006 through 2011, I was the supervising judge of our mental health court, which began in 2001 and went from 16 individuals to approximately 350 when I concluded my service as a supervising judge in mental health court. Since 2009, I have been the supervising judge and the judge that created our Veterans Court. Its first session was November 10th of 2009, the birthday of the Marine Corps, and tomorrow we'll be celebrating its 7th anniversary. I'm also a member of the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency. It is the agency in our Commonwealth that funds criminal justice projects, and I've been a member of that commission since 2007. Since 2009, I was involved in the creation, and I now chair what's called the Mental Health and Justice Advisory Committee. It's a collaboration between two unlikely partners within our Commonwealth, and that's the criminal justice system and the Department of Public Welfare. The issues that we focus on in the Commission on Crime and Delinquency and the Mental Health and Justice Advisory Committee are issues of mental illness, as well as intellectual disabilities, as well as veterans issues. And since 2010, we've been a sponsor and a participant in the annual Pennsylvania Housing Alliance Conference. I was an original member of a task force that I'm going to talk about that is the Veterans in Pennsylvania Criminal Justice Task Force. Task Force was created in 2009, and I refer to it as a top-down model because the task force was a collaboration between our Supreme Court and the Director of Veterans Integrated Services Network. And this task force was created in 2009, and it began as a biannual event which brought all the stakeholders that would be involved to the table. There was a Supreme Court Justice that was a co-chair. There was the VISN director that was also a co-chair. There were the directors of all 8 of the veterans hospitals in our Commonwealth. There was a regional director of the Veterans Benefit Administration. Law enforcement was also involved. People from the legislators and state senators were involved. The executive director of the County Commissioners Association, senior veterans court judges that had veterans courts in our Commonwealth, the Pennsylvania Association of Drug Court Professionals, the head of the DA's Association, chair of Defense Lawyers Association in our Commonwealth, the executive director of our Commission on Sentencing, the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency, which I previously described, as well as human services individuals. At each of the meetings we had, we began discussions along what is known as the sequential intercept model. That is, where can we successfully divert people that are in the criminal justice system with an eye toward assisting them, the veterans, also with an eye toward public safety. So there are 5 levels of intercept. And there's the intercept 1, which is with the police, the intercept 2, which is with the jail or the magisterial district courts. Intercept 3 is the Court of Common Pleas. Intercept 4 is reentry, and intercept 5 is in the community. The sequential intercept model was created by 2 individuals, Dr. Patty Griffin and Dr. Mark Bunitz, and it's very effective. So at each meeting, we would talk and have speakers and discussions along each of the intercept models. We created a memorandum of understanding with the VA to recognize and enforce this equal partner or top-down model approach to Veterans Treatment Court. Some of the reasons for stressing at the beginning a need for an equal partner approach included the fact that there had not been a partnership between the criminal justice system and the VA in the past. It was acknowledged that each entity spoke a different language and had different practices and policies, but needed to get on the same page in order to support and assist our veterans. So early on, expectations and responsibilities of each partner were discussed and agreements were reached. Born out of this mutual respect and the desire to have a real partnership, our Veterans Court has flourished. I have the Memorandum of Understanding that we executed in 2009, 2010 or so that's available, and I'd be more than happy to forward it to anyone that is interested. But also, during discussions I've had with the staff at American University, their website as well as staff have access to great memorandums of understanding. The VA and the Veterans Benefit Administration have been involved in the planning from the very beginning, and we currently have 2 Veterans Justice Outreach workers on our team, and the duration of their service in our court is 6 years and 4 years respectively, and they are responsible for an 8-county region. So they have a fairly urban court in Allegheny County in the Pittsburgh area, but also surrounding counties with rural courts, so they're able to experience the needs and the benefits of each of those types of courts. Now, our model having trouble with the slide here. With respect to the VJO and our model, there's a heavy emphasis on them attending court hearings. They attend each of our biweekly hearings as well as staffings prior to the hearings. They're involved in the service plan creation and implementation, many jail visits, and they are a fully engaged team member actively participating in the meetings as well as the quarterly planning meetings and the day-to-day service for veterans, be it the medical, psychiatric, housing, employment, and reintegration issues. They're a very active participant in what I believe is a very effective email tree to handle on short notice issues involving veterans in crisis, or simply to look after or provide a listening ear for a veteran. Through the active engagement of our court with the VA and the VJO, we've forged an equal and satisfying partnership with the VA to benefit our veterans. And I'd like to go through some of the examples of what we've been able to do with our court in assisting the veterans. As I've indicated, the VJO is an active, participating, and advocating member of the team, and we've added a second VJO to support, which I've indicated earlier, a large urban veterans treatment court as well as less populated and rural counties. It's noted as these courts increase, there'll be a need for additional VJOs, and that's listed in a later part of this presentation. We've been involved in the use of medical-assisted treatment for appropriate veterans in Veterans Court. I attended a meeting in 2009 where, as part of a grant we were receiving in our county, where they indicated that on a veteran's formulary in North Carolina that they were using Vivitrol as an opiate blocker. And my question to our VA was, well, if they're able to use it in another part of the country, why can't we use Vivitrol here? So since 2011, the VA has provided at no cost Vivitrol injections to our veterans. Vivitrol can be anywhere between, as Mary said, anywhere between $600 to maybe $800 an injection. You need probably about a year's worth of injections for a veteran to successfully complete that program. And as of this date, since 2011, we have 16 veterans that have participated with the medical-assisted treatment with generally favorable results. It's sufficient of a sampling that we've begun a preliminary study of the effectiveness of it in our court, beginning with interviews of the veterans that were on Vivitrol and their successes in issues with respect to their cravings. And that's the key with respect to medical-assisted treatment and Vivitrol, to ease and to eliminate the cravings for, it originally began with alcohol, but it's more often used as an opioid treatment. Some of the other things that they have done, that we've done in working in conjunction with the VA, is the following. Let me go back. Okay. The VA, upon our request, has purchased for our court 10 TAD electronic monitoring bracelets so that veterans with alcohol issues can be released from incarceration earlier on this electronic monitoring, as opposed to having to sit in the jail waiting for a bracelet to be available. The VA has also been involved in the printing of informational posters that have been placed in strategic places where a justice-involved veteran can obtain VJO assistance. It's a poster which reads, "Are you in trouble with the law? If so, and have you served in the military? If so, contact your VJO at this number," and it provides a telephone number for both of our VJOs. They've also been involved in the printing of resource cards that we use not only as part of our court, but we distribute to local law enforcement agencies, as well as to the minor judiciary and social service agencies. And it's just a card that has reference numbers on the back. The first reference number being the Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom, and Operation New Dawn program telephone number. There's a Veterans Crisis Line telephone number. There's a Combat Call Center telephone number. The Pittsburgh VA healthcare number, Duquesne University Law School, and I'll talk about that in a little while because they are our defense partner with respect to our Veterans Court. And then the other numbers are the Veterans Leadership Program, which is a local nonprofit that assists veterans with housing as well as employment and other issues that are necessary. And finally, there's the Pittsburgh Vet Center, and that number is also listed on the card. So these are some of the things that the VA has done in cooperation with our Veterans Court. In addition, they provided the court with challenge coins, which are presented to each veteran at the completion of their time in court as a recognition of achievement. Let me go to the challenge coins here. There we go. Also, since they also provide the court with certificates of graduation that are used at that time. Our next graduation is actually tomorrow. It'll be our 6th Veterans Court graduation. And since the first graduation, there has been consistent and enthusiastic attendance by the VA as well as the VISN at our graduation. Many members of the local VA as well as high-level VISN members have attended. They're also involved in the diversion at the magisterial level as well as the Court of Common Pleas. We originally decided to divert at the Court of Common Pleas because we modeled our Veterans Court after our mental health court. And it determined that over a 2-year period of time, having someone in mental health court and in the way we are structuring our Veterans Court, that it was a savings to our county, a significant savings to our county. So that's why initially we diverted at the Court of Common Pleas, but now we've started a program where we also are diverting at the magisterial level. We're spending more time at the beginning with the hope that getting earlier involvement with the veterans will decrease further penetration into the system by our veterans. We're going to graduate 29 veterans tomorrow. My hope is with the work at the magisterial level that we'll be able to graduate less veterans in the Court of Common Pleas because fewer will have penetrated into the Court of Common Pleas. That's our hope, and we're just in the early stages of that diversion level. What I decided to do also, since I was asked to provide just simply one perspective, our perspective in Allegheny County with respect to the VA, the VJO, and Veterans Court. So what I thought I would do, and I did, was conduct an informal survey with people that are members of our team, and I'm going to go through what their thoughts were with respect to achievements that we've had in the Veterans Court, as well as room for improvement or suggested improvements. Our district attorney has been extremely supportive of our Veterans Court, and in many of these courts we realize that the district attorney is the gatekeeper in terms of what crimes are permitted to be in the court and what crimes are not permitted to be in the court. Our court generally accepts most felonies, the exception being sexual offenses and homicide. So we accept a lot of cases, and I think the reason that the district attorney is willing to do so is they've seen how successful our Veterans Court has been in terms of our recidivism numbers being very, very low compared to what would be normal recidivism numbers. But also they've been involved in a tremendous outreach to the community in support of the Veterans Court. Not only are they speaking to the community favorably about Veterans Court, but our DA has done something that I hope other DAs would follow suit in doing, and that is he has used forfeiture funds from his office to do a couple of the following things. In addition to the VA, he has used the funds to purchase challenge coins for the veterans at graduation. Also purchased, there is a publication, it's called Representing Veterans in Criminal Court, and it's the publication that's used, it's a textbook that's used by our law students at Duquesne University to represent our veterans. The book was fairly expensive. It was about $1,500, and the person that paid for, the entity that paid for the book representing veterans in criminal court was our district attorney. I mean, think about that, the district attorney making sure that there's fair treatment of individuals in the courtroom by the system as a whole, purchased the book for the defense attorneys to use in representing the veterans. I think that was great. As you can see, these are some of the achievements that they talked about with respect to the veterans, the VJO. They provide their outreach, assessment, and case management. They ensure the eligible veterans are referred. They ensure the veteran is connected to the appropriate housing and employment. And importantly, they also report to court compliance progress of a veteran in staffing and reinforcement hearings. I'll tell you why that is important. There we go. Is important because the ability of the VJO to access notes of a veteran's treatment progress gives the DA the comfort level they need to assure the community of veteran compliance, which promotes public's perception of community safety. And that's how we're able to get some of the more difficult cases, if you will, into our Veterans Court. We have cases involving, as you'd expect, there's cases involving, drugs, alcohol. There are weapons cases, domestic violence cases that are unique to the Veterans Court, and we've been able to accept those cases into our court. As I alluded to earlier, one of the suggested improvements is increase the number of VJOs to assist our veterans so that you can prevent the burnout of the VJO given too large of a population to have to deal with in terms of their jurisdictions. The next partner that we interviewed was our defense partner. Our Veterans Court is supported by Duquesne University Law School Veterans Court Clinic as its defense partner. They are Supreme Court certified law students supervised by a practicing attorney to represent the majority of veterans in our court. And I'm going to just diverge for a second. It's really been a great experience for the students and for our veterans. We have young, hungry law students doing whatever they can in a courtroom to represent the veteran. So it really is a good learning experience for them. There is a supervising lawyer that is very experienced, has over 15 years experience, and also it is a savings for our court system, as you're not having the expense of a public defender's paralegal, and things of that nature. So it's a win-win. And also on a side point here, the American Bar Association President, Linda Klein, has announced that the American Bar Association Veterans Legal Service Initiative, and what she's doing is calling out to law firms to do more pro bono work for veterans in this coming year, as also calling out to law schools to increase the number of clinics and increase their services to veterans treatment courts. And I'm going to jump ahead in terms of some of what the VJO has done, and that is the Hearing Voices training. There is a magazine called Jurist, which is a magazine for law schools. And a few years ago, 2 years ago, I believe, Jurist rated Duquesne University's law clinic as the 6th most innovative clinic in the country. And part of the reason they did that is Duquesne University, as part of their training for their law students, trains them in hearing voices. Now, many of you may know what hearing voices involves, but quite simply, I'll repeat it, and that is that for a period of about 2.5 to 3 hours, the law students have earphones that simulate for them what it would be like for someone who would be hearing voices and having to deal with situations in their daily lives. So it gives them an empathy for what would be taking place in someone that may be hearing voices. And it helps them to look for different things you might not normally look for when you're dealing with a client. They're involved in collaboration with the VJO to engage veterans, as I indicated, at the magisterial level, an earlier stage in the criminal justice system. We're currently, as I indicated, a post-plea court, but earlier engagement, the minor judiciary might prevent or should prevent further penetration into the criminal justice system by the veteran. The suggested improvement also by a defense partner is to increase the number of VJOs to support the veteran justice involvement in the short run and decrease recidivism in the long run. We also asked probation what they thought with respect to the achievements of the veterans justice outreach worker, and they're indicating they're an advocate and a primary caseworker for the justice-involved veteran, but probably more importantly, they are an additional set of eyes for probation, communicating all pertinent information to probation, thereby creating a strong supervision partnership. And they're also involved in identifying and referring to veterans courts, other veterans that are currently on probation and other courts would be appropriate for our veterans court. They also report to probation and ultimately report to the court instances where there may be noncompliance with service plans that may lead to, unfortunately, sanctions for the veteran. Now, there's suggested improvements by the probation office are making sure that with respect to each VJO, they understand their role, and assuring that when VJOs are in different jurisdictions, they understand that certain rules may apply in one jurisdiction and may not apply in the other, and have a working understanding of the differences between practices and procedures in the various courts. And they also suggest increase the number of VJOs to prevent supervision burnout. We also have in our system here, as Mary had talked about, if someone is not eligible for Veterans Services, our Department of Human Services provides the treatment and services for the veteran who is otherwise ineligible for VA services. And the Human Services assessment of the VJO is that they've been very helpful in providing technical assistance when the Human Services are unfamiliar with a VA program or service. And they are involved with coordinating with the county to assist the veterans within or without Veterans Treatment Court. And Human Services also provides us a central recovery center on a temporary basis to house veterans that may be homeless, or maybe in jail, or maybe waiting to be cleaned for the 2 weeks it needs to be cleaned before you can have a Vivitrol injection. And you can see the other things that they've done, and I've talked about the email tree earlier in the process. And the VJO, I think Mary has gone through with the achievements that the VJO sees, and I'm not going to go through that. And I want to go to the suggested improvements. Dedicated formal arraignment for veterans or capturing more veterans at the magistrate level, as we've talked about. A jail pod, that's something that we're working on, getting a separate jail pod for justice-involved veterans, and more funding for transportation, and try and increase the number of types of cases that can be admitted into Veterans Court. And the last partner that we talked to with respect to their role of the VJO was the mentor, and you could see how they describe their understanding of the team partner as the VJO from the mentor's perspective. And this is what the potential improvement that the mentors see, and that is having different kind of alternative treatments to veterans as opposed to the traditional treatment that you find within the VA system, such as they're talking about here, Warriors, Heart in San Antonio, equine therapy. And on that point, I'm going to talk about our graduation very briefly tomorrow, because the speaker at our graduation is going to be Jennifer O'Neill, who's an actress but recently turned philanthropist, who has a farm north of Nashville called Hilling Glade Farms, where she provides equine therapy to first responders and veterans and their families for a week-long period of time at no cost to the veterans. And we're going to be happy to have her as our speaker at our graduation tomorrow. I think that ends my presentation. I'm going to turn it over to, I believe, Justice Stratton.
Very much. I hope that was very informative for all of you. I just want to add a quick disclaimer on my part. I was a trial judge for 7 years, but never had a Veterans Treatment Court or a mental health court, because our court at that time didn't believe in them and didn't accept the philosophy, and that was part of what got me inspired to work on it. Then I was elected to the Supreme Court, served 16 years there, where I had a little more ability to work on system changes, and so that my involvement really has been system changes. I've never actually run a specialty docket. So some of the questions that I saw coming through will probably go to the judge or to Mary, because they have the hands-on experience. And I thank Mary for the update on the sex offenders. I'm really glad to hear that that's only the highest tier that it affects, so I can alter my presentation and include that. So that's very exciting to hear. So we have some questions, and we'll see if Kiara, do you want to field the questions? Or
yeah, and before I do, I wanted to let everybody on this know that we are releasing a report next week that our office has done on Veterans Treatment Courts. We did a survey, we sent it out last year, and this is our findings. We are releasing it next Thursday. I know the slide says Tuesday, that is incorrect, it is Thursday. And if it's something that interests you, it will be posted on our website. We will be talking about it on social media, so you can see the hashtags and our handles there if that is something you're interested in. And then moving on, it looks like we have about 10 minutes for questions. So I'm going to jump right in with some of the ones that came throughout the presentations, and then if our panelists just like to answer the ones that they feel comfortable answering, that would be great. Just a reminder to them to unmute yourself before you do. So we had a question about who the VJO is available to, and the question was posed, is the VJO only available to veterans currently incarcerated or for veterans with records, or are they available wider than that? Are they just justice-involved veterans?
I think I can answer that one. Veterans, the Veterans Justice Outreach is available to any veteran, whether they are criminally involved. We can provide some guidance. For the Veterans Treatment Courts, there may be some criteria that they meet in order to be eligible for that specific court, but that doesn't mean that we can't provide services. The veterans' criminal record or legal charges do not impact their eligibility for treatment.
Okay, thank you very much. We also had a question about confidentiality. Judge Zottola, this might be best for you. Have you had any issues with the authorization to release confidential information from the VA to the Veterans Treatment Court team? And if so, like, how do you handle that situation?
We haven't, as of yet, had any issues with respect to that. When a veteran enters into our court, part of the service plan and part of the paperwork involves a release for information, so that we're able to have the VJO get into the treatment notes at the VA to make sure that the person is complying with what's being asked of them by the court. But we haven't had any other issues with respect to that.
Great, and we've gotten this question a few times. Just so everyone knows, we will be sending out the PowerPoints probably next week. It will also send out a link to the video, and all of that will be posted on our website as well. So this information will be available if you wanted to read more on any of the slides. You will have that opportunity probably next week. So moving on, Mary, this question is specifically directed at you. You talked about doing assessments. What is the difference between the assessment that a VJO might do versus a forensic assessment?
That's a very good question. Forensic assessment is much more comprehensive. The mental health assessments we are is basically diagnosing and assessing a veteran's need for treatment, as well as doing a psychosocial to see what risks, what factors are there as far as family history, trials of medications, or treatment that they've had in the past, whereas a forensic is more in-depth to criminal behaviors. So that is done separately, and we cannot be, well, I shouldn't say we can't. It takes almost an act of God for at least from my impression, to be subpoenaed into court to provide a professional opinion or act as a specialist in that area.
And I could add to that, because the VA has a policy that you are not permitted to subpoena for cases VA personnel without extraordinary circumstances, and so generally the civil system or the criminal system doesn't subpoena VA personnel.
Yeah, they'll get their own expert opinions.
Great, thank you. So we also had a couple of questions about MATs. The first one, we had someone ask about if the VJO doesn't make the referral for MAT, how can they sort of still ensure that this option is available to a veteran that may need it?
I can answer that. I mean, we've had good luck in that area, and then if we see that an individual would be appropriate for MAT, we have the VJO said to the VJOs in court, refer them to what in our jurisdiction is called the Center for Treatment of Addictive Disorders, where they do a separate evaluation of the veteran, and if they are eligible or the appropriate case for the Vivitrol, it just is a seamless process. They start the injection process as long as the individual has been clean for a 2-week period of time, because they don't want to have negative interaction if the person has used within that period of time. But it hasn't been a problem at all. We'll just look over to the VJO and say, hey, look, let's make this referral. Fine, they make the referral. CTAD accepts them, and if they're appropriate, they're on their way.
And there's a number of different types of medicated assisted treatment besides Vivitrol. So there may be medical reasons that would not be appropriate for a veteran to receive that type, but we also have methadone treatment. We also have Suboxone, and those are all available. Sometimes the courts are reluctant. They'll have a specific type that they only want to use. A lot of judges I work with have had some opposition to using Suboxone because they feel that it can be sold and also adds to their criminality. There are different ways that we can get around that, including having the veteran come in to the probation office, getting their medications, or coming to the facility and getting their medications administered at that time. So it really depends on the veteran. And the other thing is that even though the courts may feel that it's appropriate, the veteran still has the right to refuse that treatment. We do try to work with them and talk about the advantages of a medicated assisted treatment, especially when a veteran has had some difficulty with sobriety. The other thing that we do is sometimes we'll try without it, and later on, as they continue to have some difficulty with sobriety, we may broach that subject again. So there are many different ways of working with somebody towards getting them on the medicated assistance, and as Judge Zottola said, we've found great benefits, and I've had veterans that have had both problems with alcohol as well as opiates and other drugs that have been very, very successful with treatments. Sometimes they'll want to come off of it as soon as they get off probation. We'll kind of discourage that because we usually look to a year of being on the treatment and then coming off of it gradually or having a trial. So it's just really dependent on the veteran's needs.
Thank you. And then there was just a clarification question from someone as well, and I'm just going to read her question directly. She said, our VJO indicated that the VA does not provide Vivitrol, only Suboxone. Is that accurate? If not, sort of how should she handle that situation?
Again, that depends on the different facilities. There is certification for providers to provide Suboxone or to provide Vivitrol. There is some special credentialing, I believe, that they have to go through, and they may have a number of folks on already that treatment program, and they've reached their cap and are not able to take any more into the program at this time. Those things will happen, but we will then try to refer them to a program in the community that does provide that. And if your facility does not provide it, there's a thing that is called I'm trying to think of the name of it, but it's a program for Veterans Choice, I'm sorry. Through the Veterans Choice program, you can contact your facility, and the providers can say, you know, this we feel that is appropriate for this veteran. It's not available at our facility, but it is available at another facility, and they can contract that out.
Great. So we are close to time. I'm going to try to get one, maybe two more questions in. We have more questions than that. So if your question was not answered, we have seen it. We will try to get you an answer, but we do want to try to end on time today. So I do want to ask someone, or I'm sorry, I don't remember which panelist was talking about veterans pods and as a side note, there is a webinar on our website on this issue, but someone also asked, where can I get more posters with helpful numbers and contact to put inside the Veterans Pod?
This is John Zottola. I began searching on the internet for veterans-only pods and found that there was, I think, one in Maine and another in another state, and I just did that research and then began to try and talk to our warden at our local jail here to see why it can't be done here. And we're still working on the numbers to make sure that they're sufficient to have a separate pod. But it involves just a separate environment in terms of as simple as how the locks seal in those pods, just different textures on the wall, or just different things like that. I'm just learning about it, but I think it's a great concept because you can have treatment of multiple veterans at the same time. You can begin the programming, and as we all know that if you've been involved in the Veterans Court, there's a certain amount of camaraderie and bonding that immediately takes place when one veteran is with another. There are a lot of positive things. We're meeting a little bit of resistance here, but I hope to overcome the resistance. So my study of it is in the basic level at this point, or in the infancy, if you will.
Perfect.
And in regards to getting posters and so forth, if they contact their local VJO, they should be able to provide those. We have kind of some standardized forms that we just input our own information into. So they're in the jails, sometimes even in the shelters, and in the courts.
And if I may also, if anyone would like a copy of the poster that we've used, or those cards that we've used, or anything that I've described in my presentation, if they contact either you or me, I'd be more than happy to put them in the mail for their review. But as Mary said, if you contact your VJO, I think they've got to have similar information available to them.
Great. So it is 3:30, so I think we're going to shut it down now. But as I said, if you have a question that did not get asked and would like an answer to it, feel free to email us. You can see our email on the screen right now, and we will try to get an answer for you. And we will send out the PowerPoint and the video link probably next week. So thank you all for coming, and we hope to see you on another one of our webinars at some point soon. A reminder that a survey is going to pop up. If you could fill that out for us, that will help us do better webinars in the future. So thank you so much.